All right. Okay. Good stuff. Eric, can you hear me okay, bud?
I can, Scott. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Rocking and rolling here. Hang on a second. There we go. Oh, we are excited. We are now in the final third phase of Podcast Day 2018 for us icons of influence out here. Big shout out to everybody that's been watching so far, who's logged in, joined us, who's watched on Facebook Live as well out there. For those that are listening on iTunes and YouTube for the replays, trust me, stay tuned. We've got some great content in this final phase. Trust me, you don't want to watch the NFL or anything going on Sunday night. You want to be here listening to these amazing people. We kick off part 3 of International Podcast Day 2018 with the one, the only, the host of the Halfway There podcast, Eric Nevins. So what's up, man? Good to see you this Sunday evening, huh?
Yeah, it's great. How are you? You've been on this thing.
I'm good. I'm pacing. I'm only had on my second half of my second Red Bull, so I'm going well.
You're more than halfway there.
That's right,
my brother. I've been popping in and out all day watching the live stream, and I'm super impressed with not just with everybody. I mean, everybody's amazing, but even your ability to just ask great questions and have some amazing conversations all day long. That's awesome.
Thanks, man. I plotted out questions. I was like, I got to make sure and have some good ones. And there's been a couple times I've been fumbling, like trying to fumble my own words and go from there. But it is what it is. I keep track of. I've really planned out today. I was up here late Saturday planning out things, going through people's bios to find interesting things or to talk about it. If everybody didn't ask, I didn't want to be dead air for stuff like that. So thank you so much. It's been fun. It's easy when we got great people like you on. 30 plus people coming together to do some stuff. It makes it a whole lot easier to put something like this together, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. The tribe makes all the difference, doesn't it?
Amen to that. So before I start asking questions, I wanted to share a little bit about your bio with everything. Eric is the host of the Halfway There, a podcast about the Christian experience in today's world. He's a master of divinity from Denver Seminary with an emphasis in spiritual formation. He uses new media to highlight a neglected aspect in his tradition, spirituality, personal experience with God, and to promote the idea that life with God is more varied than we expect. Oops, is that it? I thought I had another thing on there. But anyway, we are glad to have you here, Eric. Man, talk a little about Halfway There, man, and some of your experiences with being a podcaster.
Oh, yeah. Well, so I love podcasting. Halfway There, I started in 2016. You saw a little bit there to just kind of talk about this. I've had this question for a long time about how do we grow as Christians. So even if that's not some of our listeners' background, that's okay. But I want to know how we do that, because sometimes we get stuck in certain phases of the journey. And that eventually led me to Denver Seminary. But after I was out, I didn't have as much work to do. So I was trying to find something to do. And podcasting ended up being that. And I just love my show is really just a story show. So I interview people and we hear all about the ups and the downs. And there are downs. Sometimes when you hear Christian, sometimes they're called testimonies. They're just, hey, my life was bad. Then I came to faith. I came to Jesus and everything was better. And that's just not the way it actually goes. So my show is trying to say, hey, there's a lot more to this. God is actually there throughout all of the downs as well. And we should talk about that.
Awesome. What is some of the biggest? What's some of the biggest story? What's a story that sticks out from you interviewing somebody on your show? What's one of the biggest things that's probably stuck with you the most?
Oh yeah, there are so many. Okay, so there's a couple. One, so I don't know if you remember the Christian rock band Petra. Do you remember them?
Yeah.
Okay, way back in the day, I was a Christian music nerd, I guess you could say, and so I loved Petra.
A rocker.
Oh yeah, we didn't really do the horns that much, but but I actually reached out to the lead singer John Schlitt, and earlier this year I got to interview him. He has an amazing story, so I'll give you a short version of that. Right, he was in a secular rock band around Illinois, and he got thrown out for doing too much cocaine. Like, how much cocaine do you have to do to get thrown out of a rock band? Like, that's a lot of cocaine, my friend. He got thrown out. He got fired, and his wife had found Jesus through the Jesus movement, which was going on in the early or late 70s, 80s. And so she wakes him up one morning and says, he was sitting there actually contemplating suicide. She wakes him up and says, "Hey, you need to come with me to church, or to come to your pastor." He said, "Well, when did I tell you that I was going to do that?" She said, "Oh, last night when you were really drunk." And he goes, "I couldn't dispute that. I didn't know." So he goes and he says, I walked in there with an attitude, and I walked out with the Holy Spirit. And that was like, it's just a dramatic story. He ends up traveling all over the world with the rock band Petra, and seeing a lot of other people having a similar experience in his ministry. So that's a really big example. My tagline is actually about ordinary Christians have the experience of ordinary Christians, right? So can I tell you one other story?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. So there's one story that I love to tell, that this guy, he was in college. He grew up in kind of just a normal American family. He sort of believed in God, but not really a personal faith. And so he goes to college, and in his dorm, they were showing this film by a guy named Josh McDowell about relationships, men and women. And so, something that freshmen in college everywhere are interested in. So he kind of hangs in the back, was watching that, and he leaves, and he's like, I don't know. This is going to get religious on me. He's in his dorm room and thinks, maybe I need to know something about that. So he goes back and listens to it. And in that presentation, the guy tells him to read the book of John, and which is a common book. It really pretty much encapsulates the message. And so he says, I'm going to go read the book of John. He gets a Bible from somewhere. Can't find the book of John, ends up in the book of 1 John. And so he's reading this story. Well, he wrestles with God for a couple of weeks. He ends up giving his life to Christ. Here's the amazing thing. He ends up being an evangelist. And here's how we knew he was an evangelist. He goes to the bar like you do as a freshman, and Highway to Hell comes on from AC/DC, right? I'm on a highway to hell. Yes, awesome song, rocks. And he's going, yeah, you kind of are. And like, I got to tell everybody, that's all he could do to not get on the like bar stool. Instead of dancing, he was going to preach at him. And so he's like, oh, this is weird. He becomes an evangelist. He preaches all over the world. Now, here's the kicker. He actually never saw the guy who sponsored that little event at his dorm again. So that guy probably left that event feeling like, hey, there were only a handful of people, doesn't know if anybody got the message or not. And actually, there was someone who not only got the message, that God got his heart, but that God used him to go all around the world to spread the message. Those are the kind of ordinary stories that I think are out there. Mm-hmm. Always get a chance to hear from our pulpits in church. Mm-hmm.
But they're not just ordinary stories, though. I think it's the biggest thing. Yeah. They're extraordinary. They're not just ordinary stories. I mean, maybe ordinary stories to that person, but they really provide a message. They really share the extraordinary experience that people are going through, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I actually, one of my questions as growing up was why, like I said, why I don't see these kinds of things. I read the Bible and go, there's all these kind of amazing things that happen, right? Like, how come that doesn't happen at my little church? And we weren't very charismatic, so that would explain a lot of it. But
or you didn't do a lot of cocaine, so you say?
No cocaine in my church either. But so growing up, like I just kind of was searching for that kind of thing. And I think that it does happen a lot more than we give credit for and that we know. It's just that those aren't the people who end up with a platform.
Mm. That's true. That's true. How's your podcast helped you?
Oh, man. It has totally changed several things that I think about God. So one thing I used to not believe, I used to think was a little crazy, that people would say God spoke to me. Grew up in a tradition where it was only what was written down could be what you heard from God. I still believe we should filter everything through that. There's a good reason we have it. But I've heard so many stories of people who have heard from God and they went and did something and it's like, oh yeah, it's confirmed by how great it was. I also believe now that God really does do miracles today. So one lady told me a story in South Africa. She was going to she had enough food to feed the kind of orphan kids in the neighborhood, like 150 kids, and 200 kids showed up, right? And so she's like, I don't know how I'm going to feed all these people. They start dishing out hot dogs, and next thing she knows, everybody has a hot dog, but she didn't have 200 hot dogs, right? That's almost like a biblical story.
Right.
What happened?
Loaves and fishes right there.
I can't explain it. All I know is that they fed all the kids, and they trusted God, and it worked.
Wow. That's a loaves and dogs story. We can call it loaves and fishes, right?
Yeah.
Wow. That's definitely awesome out there. What is What is your advice to somebody who's starting a podcast out there? What's one bit of advice that you've learned over time? Because you've been doing your podcast, you've been doing Halfway There for how long now?
About 2 years, a little over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I would tell people, I always tell them a couple of things. Number one, you want to figure out your voice and your message right away. You want to know who you're talking to and what you want to say to them, how you want to help them. Particularly in the Christian podcaster scene, a lot of us want to be teachers, but we might not be teachers. That's kind of what you see in that world. So you got to know how you're going to actually share that and have some experience with it. I would also say, don't be afraid of the technology. All of us were afraid of the technology at one point, and we actually had to say, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I started out with a really simple setup, talking into my little microphone, going into my laptop that would drop all the audio on me, and then I'd have to, be mad for a few minutes and then do it again. It's okay. You can do it. That's good for you. And then, there's a few things. There's a lot of ways to promote your podcast, but if you can figure out some of the best practices, you'll be okay.
Before we dive in, how has it changed you over the last 2 years with your show?
Yeah. I'm a lot more confident today.
Yeah.
I used to wrestle a lot with what's my contribution to the world. I used to bounce people's checks in a bank. Man, that's not a good job to have. That's it's fun to create a little chaos for the reps on the phones, but it's not, it's just not a good gig. It's not a great contribution to the world. So what I've found through Halfway There is a message that really does resonate with people. I find a lot of people have stories about God, and sometimes even if they don't believe the same as me, which is interesting, right? They have experienced God in other ways that have to have an open heart to, and so that's kind of changed me a lot in terms of just wanting to listen a lot more instead of talk a lot more.
Mm-hmm. I think some people definitely want to talk more than they listen. They ask a question, waiting to ask the next one versus actually listening to the answer. And it really, if you can listen, it really leads to a whole different level of the interview or talking with people to find out, that asking that little bit extra question, that a little extra to dive deeper in the story, huh?
Yeah, that's one of those things. Another thing I've added recently is I learned that I spent like 10 years on the phones doing customer service. And I was not thankful for that experience until I started becoming a podcaster. Because the ability to ask a question and then just be quiet and listen to the answer and try to hear. I actually prefer these days. I like the video thing, but if I can do audio and just have either somebody on the phone or just turn off the video on Zoom or something, it takes me back to that kind of experience where I'm okay. I'm listening and I'm kind of there and I'm anticipating what's going to happen and how I can help them, or pull more out, because that's part of what you have to do, whether it's in customer service or in an interview. Like, tell me more about that.
Mm-hmm. What's a mistake that you've made that has helped you more so than anything else with your show, with Halfway There?
Boy, that is.
I pulled that out of left field. I just want you to know that, Dave.
It's a good question. I'm trying to think of a mistake. Like, what kind of mistakes have I made? I think one of them was. So the only thing I regret, I have a platform for my website and my podcast feed right now, and I wish I would have gone with one of the more established places like Libsyn or Blueberry to host my show, and it's going to be someday I'm going to have to make that migration, I think, and so I'm not sure how hard that is. Maybe somebody out there knows and they can help me, but that's. Just I would say follow the best practices is helpful, but I don't know. It's good.
Well, it's a valuable, because I think sometimes we get so bogged into doing whatever we can get done, we don't try to go back and fix things.
Mm-hmm.
We just put a Band-Aid on it and then kind of work our way through it, right?
Right, and that's what you have to do. So, like, I guess I had to learn to really iterate and allow myself to do that, because I think I had to start out. When I started out, I felt like it had to be perfect, and it had to be good enough. And it didn't even have to be that. It just had to be. Like, I just had to create the thing so that I could get better. And, you have to start somewhere. And if you don't, then you're just never going to get it at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge lesson for me, was to allow myself to iterate.
Delivered is better than perfect, right?
Totally. And that took me years, literally years of my life to figure that out. That's too bad. I needed you. Where were you? Where were you, Scott?
Running around acting like a crazy fool. What are your goals? Where are your goals for the next 12, 24 months with the show, Eric?
Yeah. With my show right now, I'm really trying to get outside of the United States. So a lot of the people I've interviewed are either in my immediate community at my church or, in basically the same kind of scenario, a white suburban context, which is great. God does some awesome things there. But
right.
I also want to hear, so I'm trying to find people who are in other kinds of Christian communities around the United States or around the world. So I found a couple people who have been in New Zealand, or I've got a friend trying to connect me with some people she knows in South Africa, the lady who had the hot dog story, and some other people around the world, because I really believe today, one thing, I don't know if you know this, but one of the things we see today is that Christianity is actually thriving in places that missionaries went in the 19th century. So like Asia and South America and Africa, the church is actually booming there. We have no idea. And so I'd love to say to American Christians, hey, this is actually going on, and let's take a look at it, and let's be blessed by it as well.
What's the biggest surprise you've got? You got any feedback from your listeners that have just kind of blown you away of how your show or the stories from your audience has really helped shape them or affected them in positive ways?
Yeah, not necessarily from listeners. The one thing that they tell me is that they really like the ordinary people, which I like to interview authors, right? Because I like books.
Uh-huh.
And I like people. Like I love interviewing John Schlitt. That was a huge thing for me, where I was like, this is so cool. Never would have imagined, right? But they like the ordinary people. They like people who have stories with God that are very much like theirs, and that I think is really amazing.
Mm-hmm. I think we all struggle day in, day out. I think that's one of the great things here. And ordinary people who are probably going through the same circumstances or the same struggles with faith, the ups and downs of faith, of helping us kind of get through the day in, day out stuff. Because let's face it, it is not a positive environment out there for the most part, right? And a lot of people have a tendency to shy away from expressing their faith and their religion, when I think it's important, especially having your platform, having the podcast, be able to share that and giving others an opportunity to find like-minded individuals that are walking that same walk and dealing with the same hurdles, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think that we need community more than we know, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is a lot of our churches aren't building that in the ways that we need. They don't say to us that we need to be, that you're not alone, because we don't get that deep. And so the opportunity to hear somebody who's actually going deep into a dark night of the soul, we kept using that language
we sure did.
Summit, which is really John of the Cross, which is really part of the spiritual journey. It is a normal thing, and so I think we have to dive into it, tell the story, and say yes. It is normal. I felt that, and I was really mad. So, but I worked through it this way.
That's definitely great stuff there for you. What are so we talked about looking for more people internationally for you that have more of the international flavor, I guess you could say, stuff like that. Where else? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself going? Yeah.
So a couple things. One, I really want to talk to evangelicals, and like I said, just to say that this is great things that we'll say to them. The spiritual journey is much wider and deeper and longer than you've been told. And so that I want to create a series of products that will kind of help them do that, that would lead to ultimately spiritual direction, which is not a thing that we do as evangelicals that well. We don't always, it's just not a tradition that we've inherited. Like Roman Catholics do it a lot better than we do, and I've learned it from some of them. So I'd love to do that kind of work. That's something I would like to do. But I also have this semi-secret ambition to create a Christian new media company that would actually, I want to call it, can I announce it right here? Is that okay?
Yeah, you can announce it. Just make sure you've bought the domain first.
Oh, that's a good idea. I do have a domain. All right.
Okay, all right. Yeah, announce it here first. Hang on a second. Drum roll, please, everybody.
I knew I was going to have a silly time when I got in here with you. I want to call it Get Curious Media. So the idea is that we're going to do things that make people ask questions, not that answer the questions. There are other people who will answer your questions, but I want to raise questions for you and help, and the questions that you're already asking, whether it's in Facebook content. Facebook Watch, have you seen this thing? Like, that is insane. That really, it intrigues me so much. But Facebook, whether it's video there or YouTube or Netflix, I don't know, but there's going to be some stuff like that.
I love it. The Get Curious Network.
Yes. Yeah. So it'll hopefully prompt people to kind of dive into some of their questions.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's I'll tell you a funny. Wow. Okay. So Steph and I went and saw Smallfoot last night. You know, the new Disney movie about the Yetis.
Okay.
And there's a scene in there where the master Yeti is like, "Oh, you have questions? Push them down. Just bury them. Push them down." And I think a lot of people do that, especially when it comes to faith or asking about things. I don't want to do that. It's taboo. I don't want to make a scene or anything like that. Or we've talked about how two things you don't talk about, religion and politics, because you'll never win. Everybody's right and everybody's wrong, right? Aspect of that. I don't necessarily think that's correct. I think everybody has a different journey. Everybody has a little bit different faith, and the more you can share that or ask questions of each other, I think the stronger that you become.
Yep, I think so too. And you don't get understanding as long as things are unfamiliar. And so we have to ask those questions, and we have to say, okay, you believe this, why? Tell me about that. Help me to understand. And as we do, whether or not we ever come to an agreement on who God is and who Jesus is, you have to make your choice, and I have to make my choice. But at least if we understand each other, that we're all in the same boat, we're human beings, man, that is so much more powerful, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, it totally is. It definitely is out there. As we're waiting on here, what's the best way for people to reach out to you not only connect with you to listen to the show, but if they've got somebody you can recommend? Because I believe in the power. I believe in the power of sharing a message, reaching out, and having God and the environment out there really put the right people in the right path for you. So what's the best way if somebody knows somebody that's internationally who has a story to tell or journey that they'd like to share? What's the best way for them to reach out to you, Eric, to help you share that story?
The best way is to go to my website, ericnevins.com. Just click the contact button, send me an email, and I try to respond to those really quick. So that is the best thing. You can always hit me up on Facebook as well. Awesome.
Good stuff there, bud. Well, hey, I want to say thank you for being a part of Podcast Day 2018. This has been a blessing. So great. I love what you're doing with the show. I've been listening to some of the episodes out there, get a feel for it, really enjoy it. It's something I'm subscribing to and listening to on a regular basis now. So.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. I appreciate that. It is truly an honor. I seriously feel so privileged to be a part of this group. Like, all you guys are amazing and kind of astounding to me. So I appreciate it.
Well, you know what? You're amazing in your own rights as well, bud. That's one of the great things about it is we all have our message and our platforms. And the biggest thing is we're not afraid to share. And I think that's what separates those that have something versus those that really take it to the next level is they're not afraid to share the ins, the outs, the goods and bad. And you're definitely sharing there on halfway there for sure, man.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it, bud. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right. So let me